Thank you all for attending. We'll go ahead and get started now. Today's webinar is titled Community Employment Opportunities and brought to you by Proactive Community Services in collaboration with AIDS Foundation Chicago and Illinois Department of Health. Proactive Community Services, or PCS, was founded in February 2005 by an African-American woman who saw a need to close the widening social and health disparities that severely affected African Americans. PCS is a minority-serving human service organization located in the South suburban community of Flossmoor and provides comprehensive services to 28 South and 5 Southwest suburban communities. The agency's service portfolio includes health and wellness and workforce development and supportive services. During this webinar, PCS invites faith leaders, community advocates, and other individuals interested in reducing the rate of HIV, STI, and other communicable diseases in Black and Brown communities to join this conversation facilitated by Al Forbes, MBA of Forbes Consulting, Minister Oliver W. Patton Jr., MSP of Love Abide MB Church, Pastor Charles Strait of Faith United Methodist Church, with guest speaker Roberta Coleman. You can view recordings of past sessions on the PCS website at pcsil.org by navigating to past webinars in the Events and Webinars section of the homepage. Please continue this and other conversations on ending the epidemic on Facebook. As a reminder, your cameras and microphones are set to off, so please write your questions and comments in the chat box, which we will be monitoring. If you would like to come off mute to ask a question, please just raise your hand from your Zoom panel and I'll give you the floor. Also, PCS is looking to get more speakers for future webinars. Please send information for potential speakers to gtzwebinars@pcsil.org. As an announcement, the Resilience Project is conducting a paid study to learn about the experiences that have affected your HIV care. They are looking for Black men who are 16 to 35 in age, living in Chicago, and having sex with other men. Eligible participants can earn a $50 gift card for completing an online survey. If you're interested, please call 773-647-0359. Finally, as a disclaimer, the views and opinions expressed in our discussion are those of the presenters and do not necessarily reflect the official policy or position of Proactive Community Services. That's all I have for everyone. I think we're ready to get started. Roberta, I believe you said you had some slides. I'll throw it over to you to introduce yourself and get started.
Okay, thank you. And let me get started with sharing my screen. Okay. Okay.
There you go.
All right.
We got it.
Okay, great. All right. Okay. My name is Roberta Coleman, and I have been employed with PCS as an employee for 5 years this past April. I'm the executive assistant, medical assistant, the HAB specialist for ADAP, and I'm also the program coordinator for the PES program. Okay, just want to mention a couple of the services that are offered by Proactive Community Services. As I mentioned, the HABS, which is the HIV/AIDS Benefit Specialist, Medical Case Management, Housing Navigator, and HIV and STI testing. Okay. For the ADAP program, we provide assistance with and access to HIV/AIDS medications that are on the approved Ryan White Part B formulary list. The medication assistance services are designed to provide assistance with and access to HIV/AIDS medications that are on the formulary, which include all antiretroviral therapies approved by the U.S. Food and Drug Administration. We also provide referrals to our medical case manager and our housing navigator for additional services. So if anyone is in need of drug assistance with getting prescriptions or insurance for antiretroviral drugs, they can call me at 708-248-6166. Our medical case manager is responsible for completing reassessments with HIV clients to include completion of a care plan, in addition to seeing clients periodically to address their current needs and checking compliance to medical care and adherence to HIV medications, as well as linkage to additional services. And to schedule an appointment or for more information, you can reach out to our medical case manager, Aisha Collins, at 708-248-6166. Our housing navigator will assist community clients and families living with HIV and AIDS to obtain or maintain housing stability. The housing navigator will conduct assessments of clients' housing needs and will provide crisis prevention and intervention services to unstably housed and homeless clients and families. The housing navigator will also provide housing information and linkage to services in order to prevent disruption in care. For assistance or more information on that, you can reach out to our housing navigator, Tribeca Jackson Frazier, at 708-248-6166. And Ron, Pierre, and Jeff are our community health workers, and they perform free HIV and STI testing in the office and in the field for our continuum of care. Our testing office is located at 19730-6 Governor's Highway in Flossmoor, Illinois, and it's by appointment only. So to schedule an in-office appointment for confidential testing, you can go to our website at pcsil.org and click on the green button at the bottom of the page. And last but not least, we have the Proactive Employment Solutions Job Readiness Program, where we assist clients with finding and securing employment, creating a resume or updating an old resume, performing mock interviewing. And then we also offer free Google productivity courses with certificates in Google Docs, Google Sheets, Google Slides, and Google Forms. So for information on that, you can reach out to me at 708-248-6166 for more information or to get started. Now, I'm closing out the first 12 sessions of Getting to Zero. So I'm going to address some things that have already been covered and some that have not. And each one is reflective of a domino in a chain. So they're all connected to the root problem, which I'm going to address during this presentation. 2 years into the pandemic and multiple variants that have resulted in 1 million deaths across the US, Black Americans are still suffering from COVID-19's public health and economic consequences. The recovery of most people of color has been sporadic and uneven, from permanently closed businesses to limited access to healthcare, housing, and food insecurity, increases in suicide and violent crime, and educational setbacks. Experts say it will take years before Black Americans are able to fully recover from the pandemic. In 2021, the National Restaurant Association had settled on a number of restaurant closures, and that number was 90,000, both temporary and permanent, which includes diners, cafes, chain outlets, taverns, bars, and neighborhood restaurants. And as a lot of us know, many low-income Black and brown people work in the restaurant industry. In June of 2021, of the 6.2 million people that didn't work at all or worked fewer hours at some point in the last 4 weeks because their employer closed or lost business due to the coronavirus pandemic, 575,000 were aged 16 to 24, 3.7 million were aged 25 to 54, and 1.9 million were 55 years and over. This is an article headline from the US Census Bureau in April of this year. And it said COVID-19 pandemic hit Black households harder than white households, even when pre-pandemic socioeconomic disparities are taken into account. Socioeconomic disparities, also known as SES, is usually described as low, medium, and high. People with a lower SES usually have less access to financial, educational, social, and health resources than those with a higher SES. According to the US Census Bureau, in 2021, non-Hispanic Black adults had higher rates of economic and mental health hardship than non-Hispanic white adults across several measures. The report found that Black adults in households where someone had lost employment income since the start of the pandemic were more likely than white adults to report uncertainty about their ability to pay for housing in February of 2021. Black unemployment rates were higher than white unemployment rates even before the pandemic, according to the Bureau of Labor Statistics. These labor market differences put Black working age adults at a greater disadvantage when the pandemic started, and the unemployment rate for Black adults remained higher all during the pandemic. This shows us how lack of employment for Blacks during the pandemic affected the ability to pay for housing, caused an increase in debt, such as increased credit card use, taking on loans, and borrowing money to pay for gas, food, and rent, food insecurity, and it affected mental health, causing anxiety, depression, and spikes in substance and alcohol use. And I don't know if any of you all are aware of this, but Governor Pritzker had passed a law that stopped payday loans in the state of Illinois. Let us not forget the problem of systemic racism. The pandemic plummeted the US into a deep recession that affected workers and families across the country. However, the effects of this recession have also revealed the damaging result of long-standing systemic racism in the labor market. And let me just put a pin right there and say that everything that I'm talking about in this presentation, it all stems from the root of the tree, and the root of the tree is racism.
Oh, girl, you.
Okay, so I'm discussing the branches of the tree, and the root is racism. While the unemployment rate for white men was high in relation to pre-pandemic levels at 12.3% in April of 2020, Black men's unemployment rate soared to a high of 16% in June of 2020, a level that has never been reached by white men. According to American Progress, there are far more Black men who are jobless than the already high unemployment figures would suggest, further contributing to greater poverty, reduced financial stability, and a lack of generational wealth in Black families and communities. And here's another opinion of mine. I don't always go by the unemployment rate because it only speaks of people who are actually applying for unemployment. It does not account for those who fall off of unemployment and still don't have a job. Minority men face a greater number of psychosocial obstacles, all of which predispose them to mental health conditions. During their transition to adulthood, Black males become increasingly aware of their restricted opportunities, generating higher levels of stress. The prejudice and discrimination faced by Black men limits their ability to accumulate social, personal, educational, and material capital. Now we're going to springboard into the branch of health. The CDC produces detailed annual reports on the population prevalence of 3 STDs, chlamydia, gonorrhea, and syphilis. Chlamydia is the most common bacterial STD in the US, and the CDC estimates that there were 4 million chlamydia infections in 2018. It's transmitted by vaginal, anal, or oral sex, and most people with chlamydia do not have any symptoms at all. That's 90% of males and 70 to 95% of females. So many youth do not perceive a need to be tested for it. However, if it's untreated, it can cause serious damage to a woman's reproductive system. It can cause acute and subclinical pelvic inflammatory disease, which can lead to chronic pelvic pain, tubal factor infertility, and potentially fatal ectopic pregnancy, which is when a woman gets pregnant and the fetus gets stuck in the tube and continues to grow in the tube. If it continues on and she doesn't receive any treatment, it will rupture the tube and it can cost her her life. For women with PID, the risk of tubal factor infertility increases from 8% after 1 episode of chlamydia to as high as 40% after 3 episodes. Gonorrhea is also a common bacterial STD. The CDC estimates that there were approximately 1.6 million new gonococcal infections in the US in 2018, and more than half occur among young people aged 15 to 24 years old. It's transmitted by sexual contact with the penis, vagina, mouth, or anus of an infected partner, and it can also be spread from a mother to her baby during childbirth. Untreated, gonorrhea can cause serious health problems for women and men. These include PID and infertility in women, and disseminated gonococcal infection, which can lead to arthritis, tenosynovitis, and or dermatitis. Syphilis is also a bacterial STD that can have serious adverse effects on health. It's transmitted from person to person by contact with a syphilitic sore, known as a chancre. This transmission can occur during vaginal, anal, or oral sex. And there were 129,813 reported new cases during 2019, and most of them were among gay, bisexual, and other men who have sex with men. Pregnant women with syphilis can transmit it to their unborn child. In 2019, there were 1,870 cases of congenital syphilis. Some people with untreated syphilis develop tertiary syphilis, which can adversely impact many different organ systems, including the heart and blood vessels and the brain and nervous system. A growing body of research suggests that there are multiple mechanisms and pathways through which racism leads to pathogenic conditions that facilitate the observed elevated risk of STDs in youth of color. In the context of the US, racism has been conceptualized as an organized societal system in which whites, the dominant racial group, use their power to categorize, rank, and restrict access to valuable social resources and opportunities to racial groups regarded as inferior. Accordingly, racism functions as a fundamental driver of racial inequities in health. That is, it creates conditions that trigger adverse changes in health, and these changes will persist as long as the basic or fundamental causes remain intact. There are 3 key mechanisms of racism. First, institutional or structural racism refers to racial inequities that are embedded in the routine policies and procedures of social institutions that create unequal outcomes by limiting access to opportunities and rights of the groups deemed inferior. Second, cultural racism encompasses social ideologies that initiate and sustain negative racial images and stereotypes that can reduce support for egalitarian policies, trigger health damaging psychological responses in stigmatized groups, and facilitate explicit and implicit biases in the large society that reduce the access of stigmatized groups to desirable resources. Third, differential treatment or discrimination by both institutions and individuals, in addition to reducing access to opportunity, can be experienced as stressful life experiences that can adversely affect mental and physical health. Residential racial segregation is one of the most influential institutional or structural mechanisms of racism. This term refers to the historic physical separation of the races by enforced residence of Blacks and other stigmatized groups in certain residential contexts so that whites were protected from residential proximity to them. Research reveals that it reduces access to quality elementary and high school education, employment opportunities, and pathways to socioeconomic mobility. One national study using rigorous statistical analysis found that the elimination of segregation would erase Black-white differences in income, education, and unemployment, and reduce racial differences in single motherhood by 2/3. Researchers used national data for the US and discovered that conditional on parents' income, Black children have lower incomes than white children, and that the driver of these differences in social mobility is the marked differences in resources and opportunities at the neighborhood level. Other research confirms that being raised in a single parent household is associated with lower levels of parental monitoring and predicts increased risk for multiple outcomes. Children raised in single parent homes are more likely to become sexually active at a younger age, use illegal drugs, and engage in illegal activities. Research indicates that parental supervision and support is a key mechanism in adolescence and young adulthood and lowers levels of parental monitoring as observed in some single parent households, is predictive of a variety of adverse outcomes, including substance use and sexual activity, both of which are recognized risk factors for increasing STDs. Parental monitoring was also found to be a protective and crucial stress buffering factor and a promoter of healthier coping strategies to handle distress. Externalizing behaviors such as aggression, risky sexual behavior, and substance use have been reported in adolescents from households with less parental monitoring. Parental practices such as involve vigilant parenting, a high level of parental control with affectionate behavior was shown to foster planful, thoughtful, achievement, and future-oriented, alert, attentive, and cautious behavior, and discourage substance use and high-risk sexual behavior in Black adolescents with long-term effectiveness. Other research indicates that having residential fathers is crucial for adolescent sexual health. Recent findings from the National Longitudinal Study of Adolescent to Adult Health revealed that adolescents' perceptions of disapproval from their father concerning their sexual behavior was associated with lower levels of risky sexual behavior, and perceived closeness of Black male adolescents with their father was linked to a decrease in dating violence. Therefore, the conditions created by segregation that include high levels of exposure to economic adversity and psychosocial stressors, along with the stress of racial discrimination, create family and social environments where levels of parental involvement in teaching about sexual behavior, especially to young men of color, is low. Incarceration and other policies within the criminal justice system are another example of structural racism that has implications for living conditions that can give rise to risky health behaviors. Rates of incarceration in the US have increased dramatically since the 1970s, with non-white men markedly overrepresented in the prison population. Disparities in surveillance, prosecution, and sentencing are associated with a tenfold increase in the risk of incarceration for non-Hispanic Black compared to white men in the United States, often reinforced by policies which have differentially criminalized substance abuse and mental illness. Research indicates that many behaviors, including high-risk sexual behavior, are closely linked to stressors linked to various social determinants of health, including low SES, poor housing conditions, discrimination, and undocumented immigration status. One study shed light on the dynamics of HIV transmission by documenting how sexual and drug injection networks combine with higher order social structures and processes such as residential racial segregation and racialized policing contribute to elevated HIV risk among Blacks. Other evidence indicates that poverty and other structural factors such as high rates of incarceration of Black men and geographically concentrated disadvantage create a risk environment that is conducive to HIV transmission and other high-risk behaviors, including suboptimal engagement in HIV care among low-income Blacks living with HIV. A recent study of 365 Black youth aged 18 to 24 years old reported that their biggest concerns were worries about aggressive policing, high levels of community violence, and instability in housing. As predicted by the adaptive calibration framework, research finds that youth of color develop stress responses to cope with the severity of the challenges that they are forced to confront in their environment. These youth live with constant threat and fear and manifest high levels of hopelessness, low perceived economic opportunity, and uncertainty about the future. Research finds that compared to whites, Blacks and other racial and ethnic minority groups are markedly more pessimistic that they will survive to the age of 35. In response to these conditions, many youth live in the moment and view having sexual intercourse as one source of relief from stress. Research has shown that sexual activities such as unprotected penile vaginal intercourse has many mood-enhancing benefits, including increases in relationship and life satisfaction or feelings of love, and can have a protective effect against depression. The production of biological factors such as dopamine, oxytocin, and serotonin during PVI largely contributes to the feeling of well-being, bonding, closeness, and satisfaction, and can facilitate psychological well-being and stress coping mechanisms in youth. The use of protection through condoms during PVI was shown to compromise some of these psychological benefits and can be associated with depression and other psychological disorders. Interesting. Researchers also found that negative emotions in youth of color arising from stressors, including discrimination, societal oppression, racism, and violence can lead to depression, antagonism, hopelessness, and a desire to escape adverse situations through quick fix coping mechanisms. Quick fix strategies such as sexual behaviors can offer immediate but short-term stress relief. Our avoidant coping mechanisms have a highly addictive potential and boost high-risk behaviors. In addition, high-risk sexual practices are often unprotected and may arise from a desire for optimum sexual pleasure, peer pressure, spontaneous sexual activity, lack of STD and safe sexual practices awareness, or reproductive coercion. These practices contribute to the high rates of STDs in youth of color and are associated with other quick fix coping mechanisms such as drug use. Regarding mental health issues as a contributing factor to risky sexual behavior and STDs, Black adolescents with mental illnesses were shown to engage in more more HIV, STD risky behavior than their peers because of poor judgment, limited self-control, decreased problem-solving skills, and the use of sex for intimacy with others or as a coping mechanism for stress relief. We've noted that multiple facets of racism affect the mental, emotional, and behavioral health of youth of color, with one of the observed outcomes being disparities in STDs. Another way that racism contributes to this process is through barriers to mental health care encountered by youth of color. Racism in the culture that leads to assumptions and negative stereotypes of youth of color shapes access to care and the quality of care that youth of color receive. Research reveals that patient-provider relationships are adversely affected by provider biases and discrimination and this contributes to mental health cases being untreated, the deterioration of mental health status, and the persistence of chronic mental illnesses into adulthood. Implicit, unconscious, and unrecognized biases have also been shown to significantly influence differences in treatment decisions, adherence, health outcomes, and patient-provider relationships that result in longer wait times to get an appointment, the receipt of fewer privileges, having shorter consultation times, and fewer questions answered by providers, as well as being addressed in a condescending way. Explicit bias, directly expressed, believing that Blacks are less educated, less intelligent, prone to risky behaviors, and less likely to be compliant, has also found to be woven into a provider's diagnostic assessment, treatment plan, or interactions with Black patients. For example, in comparison to their non-Hispanic white peers, Black youth were found to have significantly lower odds of receiving or being referred for treatment for substance abuse, or of getting access to counseling services when they were part of the welfare system. In addition, disparities in mental health care in populations of color may be reinforced by the stigma attached to mental illness, deficiencies in the number of culturally competent mental providers, lack of health insurance, and a general lack of trust of the healthcare system because of previous negative experiences. Further, the pandemic has disproportionately affected Blacks and other populations of color in the US, aggravating their vulnerability to mental health issues because of increasing experiences of the death of loved ones, grief, loss, experiencing the suffering of loved ones, fear of getting infected by the disease, anxiety, decrease of social support systems, and fear of racial bias and discrimination in disease testing and treatment. As a result, communities of color are likely to experience more trauma, leading to more emotional and physical symptoms such as anxiety, helplessness, nausea, and headache, causing them to seek more stress relief and soothing outlets. An emerging body of scientific evidence suggests that addressing the underlying social determinants of health, economic status, housing, employment opportunities, must be an essential part of a comprehensive approach to reducing risky sexual behaviors among low-income racial and ethnic minority populations. A shift from a narrow focus on behavioral change approaches to an emphasis on the upstream social determinants can play an important role in comprehensive efforts to reduce racial inequities in STDs. Much of the best evidence comes from studies that have targeted risky behaviors linked to HIV and AIDS. These studies reveal that interventions that strengthen women's economic well-being, housing stability, and gender empowerment are associated with improved psychological well-being, economic productivity, and reduced HIV risk. For example, an intervention with a group of drug-using women who were involved in prostitution taught the women strategies of HIV risk reduction and also how to earn income by making, marketing, and selling jewelry. 3 months later, these women reported lower levels of receiving drugs or money for sex, fewer sex trade partners, and less money spent on drug use. Similarly, an intervention with Black women who used crack and had risky sexual behaviors taught them strategies to enhance their power and control over health-related behaviors, but also address their personal independence and economic resources. This intervention documented improvements in housing and employment, as well as reductions in drug use and high-risk sexual behaviors compared to women in a standard HIV prevention intervention group. Similarly, a randomized controlled trial found that providing stable housing for homeless and unstably housed persons with HIV led to reductions in their risk behaviors, increased access to care, and increased adherence to their medication regimen. The Empowerment Project is the name of an intervention targeted at men who have sex with men that has been shown in multiple communities to be effective in reducing unsafe sexual behaviors. The key to this intervention is a multi-level approach that combines reducing HIV-related risk behaviors at the individual level with community-led and individual-level capacity building and empowerment. There are several key features of this project. First, the intervention is targeted at the community level and not just at men who engage in high-risk behaviors. Second, based on early focus groups with participants, the intervention ties HIV risk reduction with addressing other challenges faced by the young men, such as gay bashing, discrimination, and conflicts over gay rights. Accordingly, the intervention seeks to build self-esteem, strengthen the men's social network, and enhance their enjoyment of social interactions. Relatedly, there is also an effort to strengthen the young adults' pride and celebration of their sexuality that seeks to present safer sex materials in a graphic and attractive way. Third, at the community level, the intervention strives to strengthen friendships and networks of social support. It created positive settings for social interactions as opposed to bars and cruising settings, and seeks to foster norms that encourage caring for one another and enhancing individual growth. Fourth, the intervention also uses peers as the key sources for the transmission of information about risk behaviors. It recruits, trains, and encourages young men to be active in encouraging others to have safer sex. Fifth, the empowerment emphasis of this intervention encourages young men to be active in identifying and deploying solutions to their problems. The intervention also involves a community advisory board that links the leaders of local organizations and their resources to address the young men's social needs. Other evidence confirms that interventions that improve underlying living conditions can enhance the development of protective sexual behaviors in Blacks. Research indicates that improving education and affordable housing can reduce HIV and AIDS incidence rates because low levels of education and unstable housing have been found to decrease social stability and therefore increase HIV risk behaviors, such as risky sex and drug use. A meta-analysis of 70 studies examining the effects of residential segregation and whites' attitudes towards Blacks on sexual risk behavior prevention interventions showed that both whites' positive attitudes toward African Americans and lower levels of residential segregation were associated with improved condom use. Importantly, these two structural level factors accounted for the variance in condom use effect sizes above intervention level characteristics and community level education and poverty levels. Similarly, a qualitative study found that among Black males experiencing unemployment, hunger, and housing instability, addressing these underlying social determinants with multi-level interventions would decrease risky sexual behaviors. A key message from these studies is that efforts to reduce STD risk behaviors should be comprehensive and include addressing explicit attention to improve other desirable outcomes in the low economic status context where many youth of color reside. Sexual risk factors should optimally be addressed in the context of broader public health and socioeconomic initiatives and interventions in these communities. Thus, the risky sexual behaviors of youth of color should be viewed as catalysts for the implementation of health and social programs that seek to enhance a broader range of positive outcomes for youth of color and their communities. Comprehensive interventions focused on HIV prevention and sex education can increase awareness, enable the practice of safer sexual behaviors and resilience, and act as preventative strategies against high-risk behaviors associated with life stressors that are disproportionately affecting these communities. As a result, children, adolescents, and young adults from those communities could grow up with an increased awareness of safe sexual behaviors and resources to sustain safe sexual practices. For example, a pilot HIV prevention intervention that sought to improve knowledge and attitudes about HIV/AIDS and reduce risky sexual behaviors in Afro-Caribbean female teenagers also focused on facilitating better mother-daughter communication. It demonstrated that when these teens felt the need for sexual activity, the parental support fostered through the intervention enabled them to use values, knowledge, and skills to make healthier choices and reduce risky sexual behaviors. Another intervention for gay and bisexual young men of color living with HIV, named Brothers Building Brothers by Breaking Barriers, was found to be promising because its holistic, culturally specific approach. The initiative did not only focus on the usual targets such as medical adherence, appointment attendance, sexual health, but also aimed to build resilience, competence, confidence, and connectedness by addressing psychosocial factors such as identity, self-reflection, family skills, and community involvement, as well as a range of healthy behaviors and efforts to create a supportive social network. Similarly, since substance use has been shown to be linked to higher numbers of sexual partners and higher rates of STDs in youth of color, interventions targeting substance abuse may have a positive impact on risky sexual behaviors among youth of color. A study reviewing 6 effective national HIV and STD and pregnancy reduction intervention programs among youth of color revealed that future programs should incorporate more emphasis on avoidance or limited substance use, increased parental involvement, and the integration of cultural teaching. Religious involvement is another potential resource. Research indicates that in addition to family and school connectedness, religious involvement can help with coping with stress and its sequela through supportive relationships founded on common values and beliefs with other youth and adults. Religious involvement can play a role in development from childhood to young adulthood that can steer some youth towards peers with fewer problem behaviors, help define identity formation, especially religious identity, and reduce the negative effects of stress on psychological well-being. Some studies find that religious involvement is associated with lower depression, higher self-esteem, life satisfaction, thriving and coping, and delayed sexual initiation among Black youth. Greater religious involvement was also associated with decreased delinquency, male LGBT identity, substance use, sexual risk, higher school bonding, and student-teacher connectedness. Additionally, churches can offer platforms for sexual health education and STD interventions. A study of an STD intervention in North Carolina demonstrated that Black churches can be instrumental in youth of color interventions. This intervention promoted the knowledge and skills about sexual health issues, built awareness about HIV and AIDS, improved decision-making skills and communication between youth and their parents by enabling parents to learn and practice skills that foster good communication with their children on sexual risk reduction. Although the intervention was not primarily faith-based, the Black churches facilitated the coming together of networks of families, youth, and religious leaders from the community in trusted and supportive environments for participants with opportunities to end the silence and create discussions about sexual health issues in safe and credible places in the Black community. Similarly, a pilot study of a STD prevention program in 12 Black churches in Michigan demonstrated the potential reach of church-based interventions. Some 1,382 individuals participated in this program, which offered HIV testing, distribution of condoms, training and engagement of leaders and youth in sexual health education and STD prevention, cross-gender communication about sex, sexuality and relationships, and the discussion of risky behaviors regarding HIV and AIDS transmission. A recent systematic review of the role of faith-based organizations in HIV prevention programs in the Deep South also found that Black church-based programs can reduce racial disparities in HIV infection. So, some solutions related to the employment part. Prioritize a broad educational opportunity agenda through investments in job training, increase the number of apprenticeship and mentorship opportunities, advance public policies to address discrimination and implicit bias bias in both educational settings and the workplace, and support legislation that increases the upward social mobility of Black families and ensures equal protection under the law. In conclusion, there is an urgent need to design and implement needed interventions to address the large disparities in STDs evident among youth of color. This presentation highlighted several promising interventions that could be replicated and scaled for future health campaigns, even as we recognize the necessity for additional research that would shed light on the need to better identify the optimal programs and interventions that would reduce high-risk sexual behaviors in youth of color. The available evidence highlights the importance of situating the prevalence of STDs in youth of color in the larger social, economic, cultural, and psychological context in which they are embedded. A high prevalence of risky sexual behaviors emerge in racially stigmatized, disadvantaged contexts, and there is an urgent need to accelerate initiatives to dismantle the structures of racism that created and sustain these social inequities and identify interventions that can enable youth to transform their lives, find healing from past traumas, and build legacies to success in their physical health, psychological well-being, socioeconomic status, and families. Finally, there's an urgent need to identify the relative importance and contribution of the various protective factors that we have identified, the optimal timing and sequencing for implementing these interventions, and the optimal combination of strategies that are likely to have the greatest impact. And before I end this, I just wanted to say, I told Gloria today when I left the office, and I was thinking about this presentation and all of the research that I did and the information that I found out, I got emotional because I got to thinking about our ancestors, how they received physical and emotional and psychological wounds. And today, what we've inherited from them is the emotional and the psychological wounds because of the racism and the rejection and the discrimination that they experienced when they came over here. And it's going to take a lot and a long time for any of that to be healed, if at all it will ever be healed.
Thank you, Roberta. That was very informative, and I think a lot of people will take many lessons with them as they leave this evening. We welcome everyone back into our listening audience. My name is Al Forbes. I'm one of the hosts here for our Community Cafe. I'm going to ask my other two co-hosts to introduce themselves, and then we'll start having a conversation. I think there's a lot to unpack and a lot to talk about in this presentation.
Hello, I'm Minister Patton from Love Abide Missionary Baptist Church, and I'm ready to get started on conversation.
Good evening, everybody. My name is Charles Strait, and I'm the pastor of the Faith United Methodist Church in Dalton. And this has been a wonderful opening to our conversation tonight, and I can't wait to jump.
It has been an excellent opening, and as someone who does a minimal level of research and myself, it was interesting as you spoke, Roberta, because you were telling us things that we're just learning. But I think many of us know that there's been white institutions that have been doing research years and years and years ago. So they have taken the information that you have shared with us, and I think that was used to set up the system of oppression in the racist system that we live in. Because as you said already, Roberta, there's evidence that having a father in the home changed the dynamics to be more positive, or to have a lean towards a positive outcome. That some of the sexual behaviors were driven because of depression and oppression and repression and suppression, all of which Black families have experienced for over 400 years in this country. And we all know about redlining. We all know about these laws that were put in place just to separate Blacks from whites. So you see, even science. I'm reading a book right now called Bias, and the author of the book did a lot of research and talked about how years ago scientists were claiming that Blacks were inferior, that Blacks were not educatable, that Blacks were close to being animals. These were educated scientists. And what the book talks about is when you put the information into the general population, they believe what they've heard. And then you create the dynamics where there are fewer fathers in the home because of arrest systems, 3 strikes you're out, and other arresting. And you tell mothers who aren't married you can't have a man in the house. So all these things, as you think about it, that was done systemically, have fueled that fire of racism and led to the disparities that we experience as Black and brown people, leading to the underserved people that are devastated by things like COVID and STIs and HIV. It's really an amazing puzzle of mess and discrimination when you start breaking things down. I want to just turn to back over to our speaker for a minute and see what you thought as you did the same readings.
I it I got kind of emotional, like I said, reading it, because a lot of the information was unknown to me as well. And so it kind of gives me a greater passion to get more involved, to help try to figure out some solutions to these problems and issues.
Okay, now I want to bounce it over to my co-host, and we're going to open up because I know the audience is waiting to jump on this conversation.
It's been great hearing your information, Roberta, because I was having a very similar conversation today about the conditions of our community. And I was so incredibly happy to hear you tie everything to the root cause of our problems, which is racism. Everything in our community, everything that is an obstacle to Black folk, everything that has contributed not just to the unfair treatment of Black folks, but to the real destruction of this nation as a cohesive country of people who are all rowing in the same direction, is racism. White folk don't understand how destructive racism is to the white community and to others in this country, that we call this melting pot of wonderful people who bring all of these great ideals and ideas to this country, which it could be if it wasn't for the fact that it is founded upon and continues to react out of its racist roots. And in our conversation earlier today, part of what I was saying is that, and this may not sound fair, but I said, as I look at the issues of Black folk in our community, I always give Black folk a pass. I always, whether it is misbehaving, I see crime, I see the inability to have companies that function at a level that creates industry in our, whatever it is. I give Black folk a pass because we have been bred, we have been created, not created, we were created by God, but we have been bred and educated to be the way that we are. Racism has created the infrastructure for a community that was doomed to fail. And so it was so incredibly wonderful to hear you make those connections to all the tentacles within the Black community that has been fueled by racism, whether it's institutional racism. Way too often, we let our white counterparts get away with the fact that they may not be individual racists. But it's not individual racism that causes the problems that exist in our community. It's institutionalized racism that created the laws and the problems within the community that don't allow us to flourish. And the list just goes on and on. So thank you so much for that connection and for those words.
I think Eula wants to say something. Are you able to speak, Eula?
Andrew, is Eula unmuted?
Yeah, I show that she's unmuted on my end. She should be able to.
Yeah, I see her hand and her mic is open there.
Hey, Eula, are you able to hear us okay?
Huh.
She actually just left. Maybe some technological stuff there. Let me try it one more time with her. Let's see.
Okay, while Andrew's trying to do that, my intake on it, great job, Roberta, all the information. I am in the almost agreeing with Pastor Straight. And when we look at it, because Roberta hit on something when she hit on the root of everything with racism, then the tree branches, and understanding everything that's going on in the country today. But I think for me, even though Pastor Straight said, you know, he gives black a pass, I don't give nobody a pass, because racism is racism, especially when it's within the black community. Because sometimes we bring racism upon ourselves within our culture, and sometimes not even pay attention to it or watch it, or how we doing it can also be very destructive as well. Because if we're supposed to be in a position where we're against racism as an whole, as an overall portrait, and not a small picture, but a portrait. A picture can be erased, but a portrait paints a different type of picture. So if we're painting a portrait that's dealing with racism across the world, but here on the inside, we are creating racism against ourselves among black people doing certain things. I've heard it where certain black people are like, well, I'm not going to hire them because they're black, they're lazy, this and that. This is within our community. So when we have to make that change, we got to start within the community to make that change, to make everything else bigger, and look at how the portrait is painted. Because if the racism is going on inside of the community and we one of those branches, how do we fix it on the inside of the community where we can have everything focused at racism as an overall portrait, and not looking at just saying, oh, it's white America, but there's a lot of black people that are racist against black people that we run across on a daily basis. And sometimes it's horrible. I had a young guy yesterday that I was talking to, and he was very racist about one guy, and he was like, well, he's this and that. Well, why should I tip him? You know, why should I do this and that? You know, he didn't do this and that, but he's serving you. He is of your culture. He's an African American man who's making a living, but you don't want to tip him because you feel that this, that, and that didn't happen, but he did what he was supposed to do. The issue became abroad because of what you did as a customer. He did what he was supposed to do. So for me, when it comes to racism, I don't give nobody a pass. Racism is racism. So if it's within the community and you do it amongst black, I'm not giving you a pass. You should know better after everything that our ancestors have been through, and we see them go through, and we see and we hear the talks and the conversations and the stuff that we learn, but it's still happening within the black community daily, every day. It's happening. So once we get to the point where we can address that inside the community, then we can go outside and address everything else.
Minister Patton, I'm going to give you just a tiny bit of pushback on that. And this may be just semantics. And I will be the first one to say that this may be just, we're saying the same thing. Maybe we're just kind of using different terms. When I say I give Black people a pass, it is not that I give racism a pass. What I'm saying is I don't find Black people can be really racist, because I think that comes from the dominant culture. I think racism describes a system of disadvantage that's based on race, and we are not capable of disadvantaging others based on the system that we created, because we don't create the systems. So from that perspective, now, Black people can be prejudiced, they can be homophobic, they can be biased, they can be all those other kinds of things. And all of that is wrong, no matter who you are and where you come from. I think that the issue of racism, however, is one that is committed by the dominant population and not by the minority population. So, and again, I will fully admit, maybe this is just semantics, but what I mean by giving Black folk a pass is that I mean that the behavior that has come out of the racist system is not controlled by us, because we were bred, we were engineered, the system of racism created within us the way that we ought to behave, the way that we sometimes behave. So I just wanted to clarify that. And again, I fully realize that maybe we're just kind of saying the same thing and using different words.
You're right, Pastor Straight. You're right. No.
Well, at the end of the day, we know colonialism has done a wonderful job of infecting everybody. And I think that we really have to look at that. You cannot exist in a system of racism, not be affected by it. And so I think we'd all agree, we're definitely all affected by it. And sometimes we have people who go to the point of mimicking the oppression to oppress others. So it's a conundrum, that we find ourselves in, because we could continue to perpetrate the same behaviors that we don't want to have perpetrated on us. We just do it to other people. And until we come to that point where we find authenticity and peace in ourselves, it's going to be hard to find that and support others to find that peace and authenticity. Has Miss Eula been able to get on yet?
Yeah, I see her down there.
Oh, can you hear me?
There you
Yeah,
go.
we got you.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, so I think your presentation was excellent, Roberta. And I think some of the things you say are profound, but those things still exist right now. And for an example, when I say those things still exist right now, we still deal with a lot of segregation, institutional racism, and racism, period. Racism in the communities that we live in. So we still deal with a lot of that stuff, and it adversely impacts us overall. So when Pastor Straight say he gives a pass, I can understand the pass piece. I know that we do a lot of things to each other that we should not do, but we struggle so much and we pull each other down because we can't have a united front in some instances, and it just impacts and permeates every area of our life. And that makes it so challenging. And it does not matter how educated you are. You are always, like I talked to Mimi the other day, and she's a nurse practitioner working at a well-known institution. Yet the white manager, who's only operations, and operations is the office manager, who wants to have this leverage over the APNs that's highly qualified, that's doing clinical care. He wants them to feel inferior to him. And he keeps repeating that over and over again. And because it's a lot of women, he's very misogynistic. The males, he let them slide. The blacks, he let them know, I'm making a difference. What are you going to do about it? So they bring it to us as if we have no options, we can't take and do anything. But yet, since most of the black APNs are leaving that system now they want to pull in HR and say, would you stay if you had better management? Well, you already know what you're doing. Because when I researched the agency, there are not a single drop of black in the upper echelons of that agency. Nothing. So how are we we got to change things. We got to look differently. We don't want to vote. We are not in the top echelons of these agencies that make the decisions. We have no decision-making powers. And we constantly just, no matter how well educated we are, it's not about education. So I think those things that you talked about that are the root causes, they still exist today. And yes, we're going to have to get together. We're going to have more programming. And I think it's going to take more education for us to begin to say, we want to do something different. Because I always say, if the playing field was equal, we're already awesome. I look at all the games and all the things we've done within our lifetime, and we would.
I think we may have lost Miss Yuma.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah. And to her point,
Yeah.
though, if we look at Black Wall Street, if we look at some of the other areas that we've had success and where we've had wealth, and finally, after how many a century, I believe, the family in California was restored their beach property that now is worth millions. But property, things like that, where property was taken and ripped out of the hands of the families because they were doing too well. As I was reading my book on bias, the woman reported the first lynching happened in the South, and it was because the black farmer was doing better than the white farmers, and so they dealt with that by lynching him. So we see these atrocities happening over and over again, and as we know, trauma is intergenerational. So that trauma still resides in our blood, in our minds, in our bodies, even though we did not experience slavery or lynchings. That trauma is still revisited by us as people of color. We are now at about 10 past the hour, so we have another 20 minutes left in this wonderful presentation. I do want to encourage people to either put, I don't know if the chat is working. I was having a little bit of difficulty. If you can raise your hand and come off mute, we'd love to hear your voice.
Portray them as, they did try to portray them as thugs. They were not thugs. They were highly educated and brought breakfast, lunch, food, a lot of things to the community. But when they begin to kill them, when they talked about economics, because economics move the world. It's the way of the world. If we have our own system, they made sure we got rid of our system. When I grew up, everything was within our community. We had our stores, we had our doctors, we had our nurses. We had just the mom and pop stores. We don't have those things anymore. I don't know if you guys can hear me, but I'm gonna stop with that. And I just think we just need to work together to figure out some solutions.
I'd love to jump in there, and Eula, I think you made wonderful points, and say too that one of the things that we've been presented with tonight, Roberta has given us an excellent view of how the institutionalized work of racism has created the problems in our community that doesn't let us get to zero, that doesn't allow us to have fair economic empowerment, that does not allow us to have the educational gains that we need to have in our communities, that cause us to have issues like mass incarceration, and the list just goes on and on. And just like those systems have worked against us for all these years. I think that part of what we have to do in strategizing is to create new systems that work for us. And those systems have to also be interconnected. The systems, the church by itself cannot save the community, just like organizations like PCS can't save the community. However, if we take a step back and we look at how the problem has been created and then work with the forces in the community that can undo the problems, then I think we have a much better chance at coming up with the solutions that we need to change the entire trajectory of the community. If churches are not willing to look at how the gospel is preached throughout the Bible, God has always given us this mandate for justice. And if we are not willing to look at how the gospel is preached, how the Bible is taught, so that it includes a lens of justice, where housing is an important issue from a theological and from a spiritual perspective, where education is an important issue from a theological and a spiritual lens, where all of the issues of HIV, COVID, all of the issue of human sexuality, of youth and young people, education, all of those things, we have to incorporate in the way we do our everyday business of church, the way we preach sermons, the way we do Bible study, and then find organizations like PCS, find organizations that we can partner with when our resources run out, so that we can pick up where your resources begin, and likewise, you can share where your resources run out. PCS can't be a spiritual hub for their clients, but when we know how the body and the mind and the spirit works together, you can then refer people to Minister Patton or to me, because that spiritual connection needs to be made. But these are the things that our community has to do in looking at ways that we can not only get to zero, but that we can change the trajectory of our community as a whole.
Yes, as we know, the point of getting to zero is not in isolation, and it cannot happen and be resolved in isolation. We're going to have to do some holistic strategizing to look at how do we empower all the communities we've heard about in the last 12 weeks, our homeless community, injecting community, returning citizens in the community, faith community, LGBTQ plus community, all of these communities that are devastated by the same disease, racism, poverty, lack of access. And then we add on top of that stigma, shame, guilt, and fear. Those are things that are killing our community. How do we rise up, as we always have, after the storm, and take our rightful place as leaders in our communities and as communities that can thrive, not just survive, but thrive? Throughout history, if you check your history records, you'll see there have been many communities that have done very well. Black Wall Street is one, Atlanta was one, Rosewood was one. We've had these communities that were in the time of us being on this continent, and we can do it again, but we've got to come together. I want to open up to more of our listeners to throw in their comments and their thoughts. And then I want to toss it over to, of course, to our guest speaker so she can close out. And then, as we have in the past, we want to bounce to Pastor Straight and then Minister Patton to close us out with his thoughts in prayer. I'm not sure if anyone's responding. So Roberta, if you want to take it from here.
I just want to say thanks for the opportunity to actually do this presentation. Those that I've worked with know that I love to do research, and as I do research, I learn also. And looking at this information, like I said, it kind of got me emotional because it's like a mixing pot of sorts, and it's like a pot with a lot of different ingredients, which is all of the different problems that need to be addressed. And one of the solutions that I thought about is that there need to be more Black and brown nonprofit organizations that are addressing these problems within the community. One of the other things that we're going to have to get past, which Minister Patton was talking about, is internalized racism. Whereas within our own race, we're racist against some of our own people. That's another problem that needs to be eliminated. And so it's going to take a long time. It's going to take a lot of effort to address these issues and to begin to see change, because we're going to run up against resistance from the racists who will try to stop us from moving forward. That's evident with a lot of the schools trying to eliminate critical race theory. So all I can say is, I pray that we will begin to see change and get past some of the obstacles which try to stop us from bringing about change. Because basically, we're still in slavery. And a lot of us just don't know it.
Reverend Straight.
Thank you, Roberta, for a wonderful presentation tonight. And I guess my closing comments, really has to do with what I think is necessary in our community, and that's accountability. I think we've got to push hard to hold more and more people accountable for the work that needs to get done. We are living in a critical time in our nation's history. We see so many people trying to push back on all kinds of things. And I'm glad that you mentioned, the idea of critical race theory. It is not, first of all, it's a lie. Critical race theory is not being even taught in schools. It's not being taught in it's a academic endeavor for college levels students. But the idea of changing our history so that you can't say certain words anymore, and you can't talk about slavery in a certain way anymore. They are trying in Texas to stop young people from hearing about slavery in terms of the horror that actually existed during that time of enslavement for Black people. And they're trying to rewrite history, much like the Daughters of the Confederacy did after the Confederate War, so that we have all of these Civil War monuments littered throughout the South to honor these folk who were actually traitors to their country and should have been hanged after the war. But when you indoctrinate generations of people with this misinformation, you can create a system like the one that has been created for Blacks in this country. I think we need to hold people accountable, and not just white folk. We need to hold our legislators accountable. They need to push back on places like Texas and Florida and many places throughout the South who are allowing this stuff to happen. We need to push back on our churches who are sitting back and acting as if this is not their fight. We need to push back on organizations who want to make money off of us, but are yet not willing to stand up. You know, we get Disney and so many other corporations who stand up for LGBT rights, and that's wonderful. I applaud them for doing that. But we also need folk to stand up to the issues of the Black community and say enough is enough, and we're not going to let you get away with that. We need our athletes. Colin Kaepernick is not the only athlete who understands the plight of Black people when it comes to the police, but he was the only one who lost his job by taking a knee. We need to hold the rest of them accountable. Michael Jordan lived in Highland Park when Highland Park was noted as one of the most racist communities in the country, and we didn't hear a word from him about the racism that existed in his own community. So we need to hold folk accountable and push them to address these issues within our community that is causing us to be the most infected with HIV, that's causing us to be the most impacted by COVID, that's causing us to be the most impacted by prenatal issues within our pregnant women, and the list just goes on and on. So thank you for highlighting this, and I think accountability for me needs to be the watchword as we go forward.
Minister Patton.
Thanks, Al. As we close out, I think for me, the words that I can leave with is that we have to stop being afraid of fear. And we have to come up with a status of being in the mindset of not quitting. Like Pastor Strait said, we all can get together and come up with some new laws or some new things that we can do that can better everything for us. We just have to keep trying. We cannot quit. We cannot quit. We can't let fear take over and push us back, that we can't utilize what we have. Like I think Yula was saying that, as intelligent as we are, as smart as we are as Black people, the education that we have, that we get through the educational system, but the education that we have coming through common sense of what have been passed down from our forefathers and our mothers to us, and the knowledge that was not taught in the classroom that they taught us at home about our history. The more we learn about our history, better it becomes, and the more that we will have in our arsenal to be able to use to fight. But I say, don't quit. Don't quit. Keep moving. Keep challenging. Let's not look at the small picture. Let's look at the big portrait. Let's keep pushing. Let's keep pushing. Do not let fear push us back. 3 steps when we take 2 steps forward. We want to take 15 steps forward and step on fear and conquer the root of the problem, which is racism. But as we leave this night out of here, we want to close with a word of prayer. Dear Heavenly Father, we come right now, God, thanking you for what was shared tonight, Father. All the information that was passed down to us, Father, that we would take it and utilize it, Father, to do whatever it is that you have set for us to do, Father. That we can go out and we can spread this information throughout the world and throughout our own community and culture, Father, that we can teach them and help them get to the point where we all can come together united as one, on one accord, as we move forward to getting to zero. We know it's not going to be an easy journey. We know we're going to have obstacles and roadblocks and mountains and hills in our way, Father. But we asking that you send the Holy Spirit to be with us as we travel this journey, Father, as we go through these valleys, these rough times, walking through the streets where we know that things are going to come upon us that we're not ready for, but we know that with you, God, all things are possible, that we can move forward without any type of fear in us and around us. But we ask you that you continue to be where you've always been, Father. We ask that you bless the speaker tonight, Father. We ask that you bless everyone that is tuned in to these webinars on a weekly basis, Father. That something that is being said that encourages us to go out and to move things that we normally would not move, Father. that we can get and we can touch others that'll be able to do the same thing we do and have the same type of passion, Father. As we leave and disconnect this evening, Father, we still ask that you download within us all that we need to keep going further, Father. And we ask that you instill in us that we do not quit. We keep pressing forward and pressing forward, Father, as we move throughout these webinars and throughout this world, getting to the root of the problem as we are and can be a part of that branch that can defeat all the other branches, Father. We ask in your son Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen.
Before we
Once
close
again,
it out,
thank you, Andrew, for doing the production work. Thank you, Minister Patton. Thank you, Reverend Straight. Thank you, Roberta Coleman. We appreciate your
okay.
presentation. And to all the
Um,
listening audience, thank you for being with us for 12 weeks. We will be coming back soon with another series of talks, and we want to continue the talk that we had tonight. So we may bring Miss Roberta back because I think this conversation did not finish. Thank you and God bless.
Thanks,
bye-bye.
everyone.
Okay,
Have a great night, everybody. Thank you.
you too. Bye-bye.
Bye.